Welcome back to Family Shadows, a place where stories of fathers, families, and the quiet strength of love and justice are told. If you are new here, I invite you to subscribe, not just to follow our channel, but to walk with us through the journeys of fathers whose voices deserve to be heard. Every story we tell holds a truth, a lesson, and a light for all who believe in the enduring bond of family. Today's story is titled, "My Daughter Vanished for 2 Weeks. What I saw at my grandchild's house shattered me." Let us begin. There are silences in life that stretch longer than sound. For Thomas Reed, 62 years old, widowed for nearly a decade, silence had become an old companion. He lived in a modest house on the edge of town, where the Atlantic winds brushed against his porch, and the evenings carried the smell of pine from the nearby woods. He had grown used to dinners alone, to the creak of his wooden chair, to the way the television played more for company than for interest. But this silence was different. It was not the absence of noise, it was the absence of her. His daughter, Laura, had always been a steady presence. Even after she moved out, even after she married Mark and had Ethan, she never went more than a couple of days without checking in. Sometimes a call, sometimes just a text. "Dad, how are you? Don't forget your meds." 2 weeks, 14 days. Not a word. Thomas had marked each day on the calendar hanging beside the fridge. The first week he told himself she was busy. The second week he stopped sleeping properly. Every morning he would rise at 5, stare at his phone, and press redial on her number. Each time the voicemail answered with the same flat message, her voice recorded in better days. "Hey, it's Laura, leave a message." He left dozens. None returned. And so the silence grew. It was not the silence of solitude anymore. It was the silence of dread. When Laura was little, she used to run through the backyard barefoot, curls bouncing, chasing the fireflies. Thomas and his late wife, Margaret, would watch from the porch swing. Laura was the kind of child who made the world feel safe. Even in his hardest days as a factory supervisor, Thomas found solace in the way she would leap into his arms when he came home. It was why this silence felt unbearable. It was not just a missing daughter. It was the missing piece of himself that had once made him believe in goodness, in resilience, in hope. On the morning of the 15th day, Thomas stood in front of the bathroom mirror. His face looked older than 62. The silver in his beard had overtaken the brown. His eyes, blue and once sharp, looked washed out, clouded with sleepless nights. He tightened the belt of his worn leather jacket and whispered to his reflection, "If she won't come to me, I'll go to her." Thomas's truck was older than most men's grandchildren. A '98 Ford, paint peeling, engine coughing each time he turned the key. But it had never failed him, not once, and this morning he prayed it wouldn't start now. The drive to Laura's neighborhood took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of memories unraveling in his mind like old home videos. He remembered walking her down the aisle, his arm trembling as he let go of hers. He remembered her tears when Ethan was born, the way she whispered, "Dad, I'm scared," and he held her hand until the baby cried. Now he wondered if he had failed her, if somewhere along the way she needed him and he had not noticed. The sky was gray that morning, low clouds pressing heavy against the horizon. As he turned onto the street where Laura lived, a pit grew in his stomach. Her car was not in the driveway. The curtains were drawn. It looked deserted. Thomas knocked on the door once, twice. His knuckles against the wood echoed through the hollow air. No answer. He tried the doorknob. Locked. He walked around to the back. The garden looked neglected, grass overgrown, the small swing set Ethan once adored now rusting at the edges. Thomas crouched, his knees creaking, and pressed his face against the window. The living room inside was dark. And then he noticed, on the coffee table lay a single toy truck, red and chipped, Ethan's favorite. The sight pierced him deeper than the silence itself. If Laura was gone, where was Ethan? Thomas staggered back, heart pounding. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and dialed again. Straight to voicemail. A voice startled him. Mr. Reed. It was Grace Miller, the neighbor, a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes but a wary tone. She stepped onto her porch, clutching a cardigan against the wind. Thomas hurried over. Grace, have you seen Laura? It's been 2 weeks. Grace hesitated. She bit her lip before answering. I haven't seen her, Thomas. Not since the night she came home late. That was 2 Fridays ago. She looked tired, carrying groceries. After that, nothing. Nothing. Grace shook her head. Mark's been around. I've seen his car, but not Laura. The name struck Thomas like a blow. Mark, his son-in-law, the man who always seemed too polished, too smooth, whose smile never reached his eyes. Grace lowered her voice, glancing toward Laura's house. Thomas, something doesn't feel right. The blinds are always shut. At night, I hear noises like arguments, but whenever I think about calling, it goes quiet. Thomas felt his chest tighten. And Ethan, have you seen Ethan? Grace's gaze softened. Yes, once he was walking back from school alone. He waved at me, but Thomas, he didn't look happy. He looked scared. That was enough. Thomas clenched his fists, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. His grandson, 10 years old, bright as summer sunlight, was in that house. His daughter was missing. He could no longer stand by. Turning to Grace, he whispered, if Laura's not answering me, I'll find Ethan. He'll tell me the truth. Thomas crossed the street, his boots crunching against the gravel. Each step felt like a march into the unknown. The house loomed larger than it had before, its windows like eyes watching him, daring him to knock again. He reached the porch, lifted his hand, and hesitated. For a moment, he saw Ethan as a toddler again, running into his arms, calling Grandpa. Grandpa. Throat tightened. Then he knocked. From inside came the faint shuffle of footsteps. The door creaked open. And there, standing small but steady, was Ethan. His hair was tousled, his cheeks pale, but he smiled, a fragile, practiced smile. Grandpa, he whispered. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. For 2 weeks he had imagined this boy lost, taken, gone, and yet here he was, but something was wrong. Behind the smile, Ethan's eyes flickered with a sadness no child should carry. Thomas bent down, his voice low. Where's your mother, Ethan? Ethan hesitated, his lips parted, then closed again. He glanced over his shoulder as if afraid of someone watching. And in that hesitation, in that flicker of fear, Thomas knew the silence was about to break. Ethan's small figure filled the doorway, a boy caught between innocence and a secret too heavy for his years. Thomas studied his grandson, the way his shoulders seemed too stiff, the way his eyes darted left and right before finally resting on him. Grandpa, Ethan whispered again, as if even saying the word too loudly might summon something unwelcome from inside the house. Thomas knelt down, his knees aching but his voice steady. It's me, son. I've been worried. Where's your mother? Ethan's lips trembled. His small hand clutched the doorknob like a shield. Then, without answering, he stepped back, opening the door just wide enough to let Thomas in. The air inside was thick, stale, as though the windows had not been opened in weeks. The curtains were drawn so tightly that daylight barely filtered through, leaving the living room cloaked in a grayish half-light. Dust hovered in the air, And the silence, God, that silence, was louder than any argument Thomas had ever heard. The toy truck on the coffee table was gone. In its place lay a stack of unopened envelopes, bills piled carelessly, their corners curling with neglect. Thomas glanced toward the kitchen and noticed dishes stacked high in the sink, crumbs scattered across the counter. This was not Laura's way. His daughter had always been tidy, even in her hardest seasons. "Mom's not here," Ethan finally said, his voice so soft Thomas almost didn't catch it. Thomas turned sharply, his heart hammering. "What do you mean she's not here? Where is she?" Ethan shook his head quickly, as if refusing to let the words form. He fiddled with the sleeve of his shirt, pulling at a loose thread. His eyes filled with tears, but he bit his lip to keep them from spilling. Before Thomas could press further, the sound of a door opening upstairs interrupted them. Heavy footsteps descended, slow and deliberate. And then Mark appeared. Mark Lewis, tall, well-groomed, wearing a crisp button-down shirt even though it was Saturday morning. His expression was a mix of irritation and something else, a calculated calm, like a man who always rehearsed his lines before speaking. "Thomas," Mark said flatly, "what are you doing here?" Thomas rose to his full height. Though age had bent his shoulders, his eyes carried the steel of a father who had lived through grief and would live through it again if he had to. "I've been trying to reach Laura for 2 weeks," he said. "No calls, no messages. And when I come here, I find my grandson alone. You tell me, where is my daughter?" Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ethan, then back at Thomas. "She needed time," he said smoothly. "She went away, a little break, that's all." "A break?" Thomas's voice cracked with disbelief. "She would never leave Ethan, not like this, not without a word." Mark crossed the room, poured himself a glass of water, and sipped it as though the conversation were an inconvenience. "You don't know everything about your daughter, Thomas. People need space. Maybe she didn't want you involved." The words cut, sharp and deliberate. Thomas steadied himself, refusing to let the man see how deeply they struck. He turned back to Ethan. "Is that true?" he asked gently. Ethan froze, his eyes flickered again, darting between his grandfather and his father. His small chest rose and fell quickly, his breath shallow. He wanted to speak, Thomas could see it, but fear chained his words. Thomas reached out, brushing the boy's hair back from his forehead. "It's okay," he whispered. "You can tell me anything." Mark slammed his glass down, water splashing onto the counter. "That's enough. He doesn't need to be dragged into your paranoia. Laura will be back. Until then, don't come around here stirring things up." The authority in his tone, the sharp edge of warning, made Thomas's blood boil, but he kept his composure, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. 2 weeks, Mark," he said, his voice low and firm. 2 weeks of silence, and you expect me to believe she just needed time?" Mark didn't answer. He simply stared, his smile a thin, humorless line. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, until Ethan broke it. His voice cracked just above a whisper. "Grandpa, can you stay a while?" Thomas's throat tightened. He crouched again, looking into the boy's pleading eyes. That single sentence carried all the weight of his daughter's absence, all the loneliness of a child left to fend for himself. "I'll stay," Thomas said, his hand gently squeezing Ethan's shoulder. "I'll stay as long as you need me." And in that moment he knew, whatever had happened to Laura, whatever secrets this house was hiding, it was time to stop waiting for answers. It was time to start looking for them. Thomas had stayed longer than Mark wanted. He could feel the tension in the air, every minute weighed down by the unspoken hostility of his son-in-law. But he refused to leave Ethan, not while his grandson's eyes kept returning to him as if he were the only safe anchor in the room. When Mark finally muttered something about making calls upstairs, Thomas seized the chance. He lowered himself onto the couch, the springs groaning beneath him, and motioned for Ethan to sit beside him. The boy obeyed, folding himself into the corner of the couch with his knees pulled to his chest. For a while, they just sat there. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. Thomas remembered evenings like this when Laura was Ethan's age, when she would climb onto the couch after a long school day and curl into his side. She would chatter about spelling tests, scraped knees, and the kids who teased her, and he would listen, nodding, promising that the world wasn't as cruel as it sometimes seemed. He wished he could tell Ethan the same now, but this boy's silence was heavier than chatter. It was guarded, rehearsed, as if someone had taught him not to speak. "Ethan," Thomas finally said softly, "you miss your mom, don't you?" The boy's head bobbed once, almost imperceptibly, his lips pressed together. "I do too," Thomas added. "I keep waiting to hear her voice, but the phone never rings. I was scared, still am." He leaned closer. "But you know something, don't you?" Ethan turned to him then, and for the first time since Thomas arrived, the boy smiled. It was a fragile thing, hesitant, trembling, but it lit his face with a strange mix of innocence and sorrow. It was not the carefree smile of a 10-year-old. It was the smile of a child carrying too much. "Grandpa," Ethan whispered, glancing toward the staircase as if checking for footsteps. I can't say, but you'll see." Those words chilled Thomas. "You'll see." What could a child possibly mean by that? Before he could press further, Ethan slipped from the couch and padded toward his room. Thomas followed at a distance, careful not to alert Mark, whose muffled voice drifted from upstairs, sharp and businesslike. Ethan's room was dim, curtains drawn tight. Posters of baseball players peeled from the walls, and his bed was unmade, blankets twisted like he had tossed and turned night after night. On his desk sat a small lamp, its light casting a circle over scattered papers and a half-finished drawing. Thomas picked it up. It was a sketch of a house, this house, drawn with crude pencil lines. In the corner of the drawing was a tiny door, shaded heavily, as if the boy had pressed the pencil until it nearly tore the paper. Ethan quickly snatched it from his hands, eyes wide. "Don't show him," he whispered. Thomas bent low, placing both hands gently on the boy's shoulders. "Ethan, you can trust me. I'm your grandpa. Nothing you tell me will ever leave this room." The boy shook his head, tears brimming but refusing to fall. "If I talk, he'll know. He always knows." That was when Thomas realized the depth of the boy's fear. This wasn't just a missing mother. This was a house wrapped in secrets with a child caught in the middle. The innocence of Ethan's smile was not innocence at all. It was survival. A mask worn by a boy too young to carry the weight of silence. And in that instant, Thomas's resolve hardened. He would not walk away. He would not let another day pass with Laura gone and Ethan trapped in fear. Somewhere in this house lay the truth, and Thomas knew with the unshakable instinct of a father that the boy's smile was his only compass toward it. Mark came down the stairs with the precision of a man who liked to control his own rhythm. Each step was deliberate, the heel of his polished shoes clicking against the wood. His shirt cuffs were rolled neatly, his hair combed back as though even at home he wanted to look like someone important. Thomas stood in the hallway, blocking his path. Mark stopped short, his eyes narrowing with irritation. "You're still here," Mark said flatly, like Thomas's very presence was an offense. "Yes," Thomas replied, his voice steady. I'm not leaving until I know where my daughter is." Mark let out a low chuckle, the kind that didn't carry humor but rather contempt. He walked past Thomas into the kitchen, pulled open the refrigerator, and took out a bottle of beer. He twisted the cap off with ease, took a long sip, and leaned against the counter. "Thomas," he said, setting the bottle down with a clink, "you don't understand Laura the way you think you do. She needed a break. From you, from me, from everything. People get tired. People disappear for a while." Thomas clenched his fists at his sides. "Laura wouldn't disappear, not without Ethan, not without telling me." Mark's smile was cold, thin. "You think you know your daughter. You know the girl who ran barefoot in your backyard, the one who called you every time she had a flat tire. But you don't know the woman she became. She's complicated. She's not as perfect as you make her out to be." The words struck Thomas like a slap. He steadied himself, biting back the urge to lash out. He had buried his wife, raised his daughter, and spent years trying to hold a family together. He would not let this man rewrite who Laura was. "You talk about her like she's not here anymore," Thomas said quietly. "Why is that, Mark?" Mark didn't answer. He only lifted the bottle again, drank, and stared over the rim with a glint in his eye that made Thomas's stomach churn. Ethan hovered in the doorway, silent, his small frame tense as if waiting for a storm to break. Thomas turned toward him, softening his expression. "It's all right, son," he whispered. "You're safe with me." Mark's gaze followed the boy, his smile widened, cruel and knowing. "Children should learn when to keep quiet," he said. "Don't you think?" Thomas's chest burned. He stepped forward, closing the distance, his voice low and firm. "He's my grandson, and Laura is my daughter. I won't stand here while you talk about them like possessions you can manage." Mark leaned closer, so close Thomas could smell the bitterness of the beer on his breath. "Then maybe you should go home, Thomas," he hissed, "before you make things harder for everyone." For a long moment the two men stood inches apart, the air heavy with unspoken threats. Thomas's hand twitched with the urge to grab the man by the collar, to shake answers out of him. But then Ethan's small hand slipped into his, trembling. That touch steadied him. He squeezed the boy's fingers gently, his heart breaking at the fear in the child's eyes. Mark smirked, picked up his bottle, and walked out onto the back porch as if he had won the exchange. The screen door slammed behind him. Thomas exhaled slowly, bending down to meet Ethan's gaze. "We'll find your mother," he whispered. "No matter what he says, no matter what he does." And in the quiet of that dim hallway, with the smell of dust and fear lingering in the air, Thomas realized the truth. Mark was hiding something, and whatever it was, Laura's life depended on uncovering it. That night, Thomas could not sleep. He had insisted on staying, said he wanted to keep Ethan company while Mark stepped out to handle some business. Mark had shrugged, almost amused, as though daring him to try. And when the car finally rumbled away into the darkness, silence reclaimed the house once more. Thomas sat in the living room armchair, the dim lamp casting long shadows against the walls. Ethan had curled up on the couch, blanket tucked beneath his chin, eyes fluttering but never fully closing. Even in sleep, the boy seemed restless, as though danger might descend the moment he let go. Thomas watched him, his heart aching. He knew this kind of fear. He had seen it once before in Laura's eyes, long ago, when she was only a child hiding from thunderstorms in her closet. He had promised her then that as long as he lived, she would never be alone in the dark. And now, years later, he was making that same promise to her son. The hours dragged. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the house, a board creaked, not from footsteps but from the shifting of the old frame. Thomas rose quietly, his joints protesting, and began to wander. He moved like a man half dreaming, letting instinct guide him. His hand skimmed the wallpaper, pausing on the familiar grooves and cracks of a house that seemed older than its years. Then, in the narrow hallway leading to the basement door, he noticed something odd. The faint outline of dust disturbed near the floor as though something heavy had been dragged across it. The basement door itself was locked. A padlock, shiny and new, hung where no lock had been before. Thomas bent closer, running a finger over the cold metal. Why would Mark lock the basement? He straightened, glancing back toward the living room. Ethan had shifted but remained asleep, his breathing shallow. Thomas whispered under his breath, "What are you hiding down there, Mark?" The answer would not come tonight, but it was there behind that door, heavy as the shadows pressing against him. The next morning, Mark returned. His face was fresh, as though the night had given him rest. He whistled as he set down a paper bag of groceries, pretending at normalcy. Thomas pretended too. He drank his coffee, asked about the weather, made small talk with a man he did not trust, but his eyes kept drifting to that locked door. It was Ethan who gave him the clue. Later that afternoon, when Mark went out to the garage, Ethan slipped into the hallway, tugging at Thomas's sleeve. He pressed something small and metallic into his grandfather's palm. A key. Thomas froze, staring down at it. His heart thumped so loud he thought Mark might hear it through the walls. He closed his fingers over the key quickly, meeting Ethan's eyes. The boy didn't speak. He didn't have to. His gaze said everything: fear, hope, a plea for help. That evening, when the house finally quieted again, Thomas stood in front of the basement door with the key clenched tight in his hand. He hesitated, breath caught in his throat. He thought of Laura, her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she hugged him tight at every goodbye as though she knew time was fragile. And then he slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The door creaked open, releasing a rush of cool, stale air that smelled faintly of earth and something else. Something sour, metallic, hidden too long. Thomas gripped the railing and stepped down into the dark. The basement steps groaned beneath Thomas's weight, each creak a warning in the silence. He held the wall with one hand, his other clutching the railing. The air was damp, thick with the smell of mildew, but beneath it was something sharper, like rust, like fear itself had left a scent behind. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its pulled chain swaying as though someone had brushed against it not long ago. Thomas tugged it, and the light flickered to life, throwing harsh shadows across the concrete walls. The basement was cluttered, boxes stacked high, old furniture draped in sheets, tools scattered across a workbench. At first glance, it looked like any neglected storage space. But then Thomas saw it, a door at the far end of the room, half hidden behind a bookcase shoved slightly askew. His breath caught. The boy's drawing, the shaded square. This was it. He pushed the bookcase aside, its wooden legs scraping against the floor. The door was small, almost like it wasn't meant to be noticed. A simple latch held it shut. Thomas's hand trembled as he lifted it. The door swung open. Inside was a narrow room no larger than a closet. A mattress lay on the floor, thin blankets piled on top. A small lamp sat on a crate, its bulb dim but still burning as if someone had just left it. And on the walls, scratched faintly into the plaster, were marks, lines, numbers, days tallied one by one. Thomas's knees nearly gave out. On the mattress, curled in on herself, was Laura, his daughter. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, her body thinner than he remembered. She stirred at the sound of the door, lifting her head slowly, eyes blinking against the light. and when her gaze met his, something inside Thomas shattered. "Dad." Her voice was a whisper, raw and broken. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees beside her. His hands hovered in the air, afraid to touch her, afraid she might disappear like a ghost if he reached out. Tears blurred his vision. "It's me," he choked. "Laura, it's Dad. I've been looking for you. My God, what's happened to you?" Laura tried to sit up but winced, her body too weak. Thomas slipped an arm around her, steadying her. She smelled of dust and stale air, but beneath it all she was his little girl again, the one who used to press daisies into his hands and call them treasures. He wouldn't let me leave," she whispered, her lips trembling. "Mark locked me down here, said I was unstable, said no one would believe me if I tried to tell. He wanted Ethan to himself." Thomas's stomach turned. Rage flared so hot he thought his chest might burst. His son-in-law had done this. The man who had stood in his kitchen with a beer and a smirk had hidden his daughter like a prisoner. Laura clutched his shirt, her eyes wide with desperation. "Dad, Ethan, is he okay? Please tell me he's okay." "He's safe," Thomas said firmly, stroking her hair as he held her close. "He's safe, and you're coming with me right now." For a moment, Laura wept against his chest, her tears soaking through the fabric. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her shaking body, the years of trust she had always given him, and he vowed with every fiber of his being that he would never let her fall into darkness again. He helped her to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her. They staggered together toward the stairs, but halfway up a sound froze them in place. The front door opened. Heavy footsteps echoed across the floor above. Mark was home. The thud of the front door echoed down the stairwell like a gunshot. Thomas froze halfway up the steps, his arm wrapped tightly around Laura to keep her steady. She clung to him, trembling, her breath ragged in his ear. Above them, Mark's voice carried through the house. "Ethan, I'm home." Laura's fingers dug into her father's sleeve. "Dad, he can't know if he finds me." Thomas pressed a finger to her lips. "SHHH, we'll get out, trust me." He eased her back a step, guiding her down the staircase as quietly as possible. The bulb above flickered, casting jagged shadows on the basement walls. Laura's foot slipped against the concrete, and Thomas caught her just in time, steadying her against his chest. Above, Mark's footsteps moved through the kitchen, slow, deliberate. The sound of a bottle cap twisting open, a fridge door slamming shut. He was comfortable, unhurried, because he thought he owned the silence. Thomas's jaw clenched. Not anymore. They reached the bottom of the stairs. Laura's voice quivered. "What about Ethan? We can't leave without him." Before Thomas could answer, the boy appeared at the top of the stairs. Ethan's small face peeked into the stairwell, his eyes wide but determined. He clutched something in his hand, a flashlight, its beam shaky in his grip. "Grandpa," he whispered, "we have to hurry." Thomas's chest swelled with both pride and grief. This child, his grandson, had been living under fear's shadow, yet here he was, standing like a sentinel, ready to lead. "Good boy," Thomas whispered back. "We're coming." Ethan motioned urgently, signaling them up. Thomas helped Laura climb, each step slow, agonizingly loud in his ears. The sound of Mark moving through the living room grew sharper, closer. When they reached the top, Ethan grabbed his mother's hand. "Mom," he breathed, tears springing to his eyes. "I knew you were here. I told Grandpa you'd come back." Laura dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. For a fleeting moment, the world stilled, the reunion of mother and son, fragile and fierce. But the moment shattered when Mark's voice bellowed from the next room. "Ethan, who are you talking to?" Thomas straightened, his body a shield in front of them both. He had spent years thinking of himself as a man winding down, his best days behind him. But in that instant, he felt the strength of every father who had ever stood between his child and the darkness. Mark appeared in the hallway, bottle in hand. He froze at the sight before him, Laura pale but alive, Ethan clinging to her, and Thomas unyielding. For the first time since Thomas had known him, Mark's mask slipped. His face twisted, not with surprise but with fury. "You shouldn't have come here, old man," he spat. "You don't understand what you're doing." Thomas stepped forward, eyes blazing. "What I'm doing," he said, voice steady as steel, "is taking my family back." Mark sneered, setting the bottle down with a deliberate clink. "And you think you'll just walk out of here, with her, with him? You don't know what you're up against." Ethan pressed closer to his mother, but Thomas didn't flinch. He had faced life's cruelties before, the factory layoffs, the hospital corridors when Margaret was slipping away, the loneliness of a house too quiet. This moment was different. This was not despair to endure. This was a fight to win. Laura's voice broke behind him. "Dad, please." Thomas turned just enough to meet her eyes, his hand reaching back to squeeze hers. "I promised you once I'd never let you face the dark alone," he whispered. "That promise still stands." Then he looked back at Mark, his spine straight, his heart pounding not with fear but with resolve. For the first time in years, Thomas felt every part of himself alive. His love, his anger, his faith. And he knew this was the moment that would define the rest of their lives. Mark's face hardened into something monstrous as he stepped forward, every movement heavy with menace. The bottle he had set down earlier rattled on the counter, vibrating against the silence that had gripped the room. Thomas stood his ground, Laura clinging to Ethan just behind him. "You can't just take them," kissed. "She belongs here. The boy belongs here. This is my family." "No," Thomas said, his voice calm yet thunderous in its certainty. "They are my family, and they are not yours to control." The words seemed to slice through the air, sharp as a blade. Mark lunged, but Thomas was ready. Decades of age did not dull the instinct of a father protecting his own. He caught Mark by the shoulders, shoving him back hard against the wall. The sound reverberated through the house, startling even Ethan, who buried his face against Laura's side. "You locked her in that room," Thomas growled. "You kept her from her son, from me, from the world." Mark struggled, sneering. "She's unstable. She needed to be kept safe." "Safe," Thomas spat the word. "Safe doesn't look like fear scratched into the walls of a basement. Safe doesn't look like a child too scared to speak." Laura's voice, though weak, rose with trembling strength. "You lied to everyone. Mark, you tried to break me, but you'll never break the bond I have with my father or with my son." Her words fueled Thomas. He pinned Mark harder, his own heart thundering. "It ends tonight," he said. "You will never hurt them again." Ethan, trembling but brave, stepped forward then. He pulled a phone from his pocket, the one he had hidden from Mark for weeks. His small thumb pressed the screen, dialing 3 numbers with steady resolve. 911. His voice cracked. "We need help. Please come quickly." Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The red and blue lights soon painted the walls of the Reed home, flooding it with a glow brighter than the darkness ever allowed. Officers burst through the door, pulling Mark away as he shouted and cursed. His resistance meant nothing against the grip of justice. Laura collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Ethan wrapped himself around them both, his small arms trembling but fierce. And Thomas held them, his eyes brimming with tears, whispering over and over, "You're safe now, you're safe." For the first time in weeks, the silence that followed was not dreadful. It was healing. It was the quiet after a storm, when broken branches still litter the ground but the sky begins to clear. Days later, Laura sat in her father's home, sunlight spilling through the windows. She sipped tea from the old mug Margaret once loved, her hand resting gently on Ethan's head as he dozed beside her. She was fragile still, but alive, free, and surrounded by love. Thomas looked at them both, his heart swelling with gratitude. Life had tested him, had stolen from him, but it had not taken away the one truth he carried like a compass. Family endures. It endures through silence, through fear, through betrayal. It endures because love cannot be locked away. He kissed his daughter's forehead, then his grandson's, whispering a promise he would never break. As long as I breathe, you'll never face the dark alone again. The light of family had returned. Thank you for accompanying us and listening to this story. We hope it serves as a reminder to all of us about the sacred value of family bonds, the courage and the quiet strength of a father and grandfather within the family. We wish you good health, peace, and happiness with your loved ones. Always remember, family love is the guiding light, even in the darkest of times.